So I was planning to come back to Baghdad, but not as president of the country.
There's very few people who can bring even this Sunnis and Shias and Kurds together.
Sometimes we were bombarded by helicopters, but we remained safe. I expect that Taliban will be re-elected. For the first time in the Middle East, Iraq has a kind of democracy which guarantee all kind of democratic rights for all Iraqi people.
It was the most difficult test in my life to prove that I can represent this country, its interest, its national interest, beyond my ethnic agenda or my background, to be a nationalist.
This is the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra, performing in the Kurdish city of Sulaymaniyah in northern Iraq. Kurdistan is the only part of Iraq that has remained safe after the fall of Saddam in 2003. In the year 2000, the orchestra was functioning and rehearsing in difficult conditions. Saddam's Iraq was ousted from the international community. The society was living under heavy UN sanctions, affecting every aspect of the daily life. There was no salary for the musicians, who turned themselves into cigarette sellers and taxi drivers, no spare parts for the instruments, and still they were playing. This decades-old orchestra is now touring Iraq, and its Baghdad-based musicians are astonished by the peace and quiet of Kurdistan.
هذا بعدين نجي العصر.
لا هو نص هذا.
هو الجامع الكبير.
هو نص هذا.
We go to the town.
The center of this town.
The center.
Yeah.
The visit gives a rare opportunity to stroll around without fear.
Ancient.
In Baghdad, the orchestra does not even make advertisements for the concerts, in fear of attacks. For some people, Western classical music is a sin. The fall of Saddam's regime might have been widely desired, but the outcome was unexpected.
We were hoping to have, democratic government and free place to live in Iraq, and maybe a different situation for the family and all that. But now we have the money, we have the petrol, we have everything, but we are very strict. Nobody can get money from the oil. I mean, you and I, we cannot get anything from that oil. From freedom situation, you are not free, but although you are free, but you are not free, you see. You can travel, but you cannot travel. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You cannot go to anywhere you like in Iraq because of this of that, or this kind of living is difficult.
And when you come here to Kurdistan, do you feel that it is different?
It's different, entirely different, yes.
In what way?
I mean, I cannot see any bad situation. I mean, the society is calm and well organized, and the people are involved in their work. As a tourist, I can say, as a tourist, I find it different, quite different. But there in my place, you have to be very secured. I mean, to go there and go there and go there. For instance, I cannot let my child to go to school without myself. You see what I mean? But here I'm sure he's freer than in Iraq, in Baghdad.
The Kurds have also become important players in the palaces of power in Baghdad. Several Kurdish freedom fighters, or Peshmergas as they are known in Kurdistan, have turned into statesmen, among them President Jalal Talabani. He became politically active as a teenager and founded his own party, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, in the mid-70s. For decades he was a Peshmerga leader, fighting Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi army in the mountains of Kurdistan. He was known as Mum Jalal, or Uncle Jalal, and could not imagine of becoming the successor of his old enemy, Saddam Hussein. But the unbelievable for a Kurd happened in 2005. He became the president of Iraq.
When I was young, I was dreaming to be professor of university. When I was in law college, I was planning to continue to study and to get HPD, a PhD, and to be professor in university. Although I was active in the political life from childhood, but it was not our dream to be president of Iraq, because we were never thinking that it will be possible. But I was, of course, expected to be in Baghdad, for example, as member of parliament, as professor of university, because I loved Baghdad from the childhood, and I loved Baghdad when I was young and I was a student in the university. So I was planning to come back to Baghdad, but not as president of the country.
So it was a surprise.
Yes, it was strange for me.
For the leaders, Baghdad is a city of endless meetings, conspiracies, and political crisis. Among the old Iraqi opposition, he is known as one of the most long-lived political figures in a country where the opponents of Saddam often faced an early death. Denise Natali is an academic at the American University in Suleimania and has been following the development in Iraq and especially Kurdistan since the early 90s. She sees Talabani as a balancing figure in Baghdad.
There's very few people who can bring even this Sunnis and Shias and Kurds together and have, whether his role was symbolic or not. As a president of Iraq, I think he did an excellent job of keeping relative, compatibility relatively among all of these groupings.
Another Kurdish important figure in Baghdad is Hoshyar Zebari, the foreign minister. An influential role in Baghdad was unheard of during Saddam's rule.
It was unbelievable. I mean, in the wildest dream, you couldn't think to be in Baghdad, to be the foreign minister of Iraq, to represent this country internationally, to be the face of Iraq. Every day we come to work at the ministry, we come for a fight. I mean, not me, but the security officers, the guards, and so on, to be prepared. Because that has been our approach to life. If you've been here 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I would not have been able to have this conversation with you because of the firing, because of the bombing, because of the continuous firing around this building. I personally escaped 3 big car bombs. In this business, you lose your private life or your freedom. Being a public figure or a well-known person, let's say, you lose your private freedom. You cannot go out, you cannot enjoy yourself, you cannot be yourself. Sometimes you cannot walk alone, for instance. You have to be looked after by the security, protection, escort, protocol. And this is sometimes boring, to be honest with you.
The history of the Iraqi Kurds is a history of bloodshed and oppression, and it is also a history of stubbornness and faith. No friends but the mountains is an old Kurdish proverb, and the mountains indeed helped the Peshmerga with the light weapons against the huge Iraqi army. Young Talabani joined the armed struggle in the early 60s.
We lived in mountains, in valleys, in caves, and we were walking everywhere. We have that time no roads or no cars at all. We were also living as simple partisans lived in their struggle. So it was difficult. It was full of difficulties, but sometimes we were in need even to some bread to eat. But we continued. That we decided to continue until our slogan, according to our slogan, Kurdistan or death. That was our slogan, Kurdistan Journeyman. That was encouraging us to continue the struggle. This struggle was not between arms. It was between morals of the people. The morale of Peshmerga with light arm was higher than the morale of the Iraqi army with huge and very modern arms and tanks and airplanes, artillery, but they have all kind of heavy arms while we had only light arms. But the morale of our people was one of the main reasons of our continuous struggle and of our success and resist. I started my family before revolution. We had 2 children when I went to mountain. So my wife was with me, but our children were with their grandmother. Every Kurd who were struggling were far from their family, from their children, were fighting in the mountains or living in the prisons or in exile. So it was something ordinary in Kurdistan. In battle, in many battles, I was not killed. Sometimes the bombs were exploding near me, and sometimes we were bombarded by helicopters, but we remained safe. We saved it. I can say God saved me, nothing else. There's no other reason.
This museum in Sulaymaniyah reminds of the cruel military campaign Saddam organized in the late 80s, the worst of times for the Kurds. During a short period of time, Saddam killed up to 150,000 Kurds in this operation called Al-Anfal. All the possible weapons, also chemical, were used in order to crush the Kurdish revolt. It was only after the Gulf War the Kurds got real help from the West and got their area liberated from Saddam's forces. This was a start for a new era, for building an autonomous Kurdistan, a quasi-state. Today, Kurdistan has its own president, parliament and government, and its own security forces, but is still part of federal Iraq. The biggest difference between Kurdistan and other parts of Iraq is the relative safety of the north.
First, those who took responsibility of securing Kurdistan were from Peshmerga, from people, from those who were sincere in their struggle for democracy and for security. In Iraq, Americans came, they gathered in streets, people for security, for police, for forces. Many of them were linked with the terrorists. Many of them were against the new regime. Many of them were not sincere, nor loyal to the new democracy of Iraq. This is one reason. Second reason, the forces in Kurdistan, all parties were determined and united in struggle against terrorism. While in Iraq, there were some groups sympathizing with terrorists and were encouraging them to do this. Third reason was the complicated kind of situation in Iraq. You have Shiites, Sunnis, secular, etc., which was kind of a possibility for terrorists to use it. And then interference by foreign forces inside Iraq was too much more than interference in the internal affairs of Kurdistan.
People have over-romanticized this region as well. I mean, you can't get stuck into, there's a tremendous amount of development, if you want to say in some sense of development. But you really got to be careful to talk about economic growth, because there is no exports. There is no indication of employment. There's, this is still an import-dependent economy. I mean, there's a lot of serious flaws that people just came and said, "Oh, booming Kurdistan. Oh, it's better than the southern Iraq because there's no fighting." But we need to be careful about how really strong, independent, and autonomous and democratic this region really is.
Kurdistan has now got two powerful parties: Jalal Talabani's Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and Barzani's Democratic Party of Kurdistan. After a few years of long and bitter civil war, the former arch-rivals engaged in a political marriage suitable for both parties. Now one of the leaders is the president of Iraq, and the other one, the president of Kurdistan. One clear example of the shortcomings of democracy and freedom of the press is the faith of a young journalist, Shardast Osman. He wrote an imaginary story about how his life would change should he marry the daughter of Masoud Barzani, the president of Kurdistan. He was sure he could rise from poverty and also bring his relatives into welfare and luxury. After publishing the article, the 23-year-old journalist was kidnapped and a day later found dead bearing marks of torture with 2 bullets in his head. Exceptionally big demonstrations followed.
He thinks differently. That's why they killed him. They don't accept critical thinking. They just accept what they like. Their red line is if you say something about their authority. If you say something, it's their red line. If you say something about other people, they don't care. But if you say something about themselves, they would kill you. That's their red line.
The official investigation concluded that a religious group killed Osman. This was an explanation next to nobody believed in. There are also other problems. The welfare is unevenly spread, especially the countryside is forgotten.
This is what happens in many parts of the developing world. You know, they focus on the city centers. They've developed the urban centers, mass migration from the villages to the cities. So what you also have had, along with all of these processes over the last 20 years, is what goes on again in some of the developing societies or post-conflict countries, is that people are now going to the cities, right? All of the youth have moved to the city, or many youth have moved to the cities. They no longer want to till the land. It's been unproductive and not lucrative to be a farmer when you can go join the security sector. I mean, if you look at wage differentials, farmers are making $100 or $200, and a security guard or security director makes $400 a month, for example. This young generation is so different than their parents in so many ways that they're not carrying the national torch. They're clearly Kurdish up in the north, and they will say that, but they're not carrying any sense of obligation or responsibility to go fight for Kurdistan. Even the Peshmerga, who were Peshmerga, wouldn't go fight for Kurdistan today. So it's going to have to be a very clever strategy, because more than 50% of the population is under the age of 25. It's the same kind of phenomenon going on in other parts of the Middle East. And the youth are integral to what's going to happen in the future. And their demands and their thoughts are about jobs, about opportunities, about, you know, pretty much what other young people around the world are asking for today. It's who has money and who has wasta, and who has power to make a phone call and give people a job. This is what explains the thousands of youth who want to just get out all the time, despite the political, you know, despite how secure this region supposedly is, despite how economically developing it supposedly is. Everybody wants to still leave. Why do all the youth want to still leave? Because there's no opportunities.
The Middle East is not known for strong opposition parties, but Kurdistan makes an exception even there. Goran, or the Change, is an offshoot from Talabani's party and has quickly gained a lot of support.
And corruption is an issue in this country now. It's the most corrupt country in the world, Iraq, including Kurdistan. So corruption is an issue. And not only financial corruption, but political corruption and nepotism, cronyism. So the people they want a new approach. Two things happened which changed the attitude of the people. One is the internal fighting, which lasted for 4 years. That was a terrible blow to the people, and regarded as a very dark period in the history of the Kurds. And second thing is, once Saddam Hussein was removed from power, and the danger from outside diminished. And then people had had more hopes about the improvement of the situation of Kurdistan. But unfortunately, because of the widespread corruption, then again people became disappointed once more, especially the young generation.
In Baghdad, the Kurds have on many occasions become kingmakers. Both Shia and Sunni, and their different groupings, need the Kurdish support. The government has actual power in Iraq, but in a country with constant turmoil, also the role of the president is vital. He can unite or divide.
All Iraqi politicians insisted that Talabani can, as he was in the past, can be the man who will arrange this unity of Iraqis.